I'm so happy to see everybody. Today we're going to take a look at land art. And I chose this subject because we had two discussions this month. The last one reflected the artist's reverence for nature in the Hudson River School. This one takes place in the 60s and 70s. And land art was an art movement that gained popularity, became known as earth art, environmental art, earthworks, conceptual art. It traveled under several different names. It essentially celebrated an artist's connection with nature using natural materials. Often the materials were found on site, and the sites were often away from population centers, in the desert and the mountains. Photo documentation was used to present the art. It was America's first major, or one of America's first major art movements, and it did influence the appreciation of nature. Now we'll look at land art that offers little ecological restoration and some land art whose intent is restoration of humanity's assault on the earth. I'm going to ask you as we move along which one you think it is. Nonetheless, the artist had a concern about planet Earth, that the world is one country and mankind its citizens. So we'll take a look now at the historical or society's influence on the artists, and then we'll take a look at some images of the artists we're going to look at their art today. The artists whom we'll look at their art. So from a historical perspective, I look at all of you and I know you lived in the 60s and 70s, I'm pretty sure of it. And you can remember what that was like. Rife with conflict issues, Vietnam War, civil rights, the Black Power movement, feminism, use of drugs, and environmental issues from people like Rachel Carlson. In 1962, wrote the great book called, anyone know? Go ahead. What was Rachel Carlson's book called on DDT, the pesticide? Oh, you have to know. Okay, I'll give you a hint. The last of the two words was spring. What was the first word?
Remember to unmute yourself if you have an answer for Kathy.
Rachel Carlson's famous book that changed Dow Chemical, Silent Spring. Remember that book? A dissatisfaction with the current social and political system was brewing in this country. And after World War II, cities and communities took on conformity, lacking a spirit of place. Youth, musicians, visual artists, theater groups, authors, all rebelled. And a good reflection of America in the 1960s and 70s was in a song, and it's better, she will create a better effect of the spirit of that age than I can through words. Her name was Malvina Reynolds. And in 1961, she wrote a song about conformity. She was a political activist and a PhD from Berkeley, California, in English. In the 1960s, she was riding with her husband and her daughter out of Berkeley, California, past Daly City, and looked upon all the cookie cutter houses stretched in lines across the hillside. So she jotted down these lyrics. It's a political satire about the development of suburbs and the conforming middle class attitudes. It mocks our suburban tract housing, and I think a man named Levitt built most of the tract houses in the United States at the time, and his claim to fame was that he said he could put up a house in 15 minutes. Her song was number 3 on the charts for several years. It was called Little Boxes, and it uses the word ticky-tacky as a reference to the shoddy material that was used in the construction of houses. She is long past. She was born in 1900, but a powerful little song. And I wonder, Priscilla, are you able to just play this little song for us now? It's a reflection of the 60s.
Yes, let me pull that up.
Little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes on the hillside, little boxes all the same. There's a pink one and a green one and a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same. And the people in the houses all went to the university where they were put in boxes and they came out all the same. And there's doctors and lawyers and business executives, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same. And they all play on the golf course and drink their martinis dry, and they all have pretty children, and the children go to school, and the children go to summer camp, and then to the university where they are put in boxes and they come out all the same. And the boys go into business and marry and raise a family in boxes made of ticky-tacky, and they all look just the same. There's a pink one and a green one and a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same.
Okay, thank you. So that's a good reflection of the 1960s and conformity, would you say? We can pull up the land artist profiles now, Priscilla. We're going to take a look at about 11 artists, or about 9 artists actually. Their response is to the social values of the 60s against this artificial plastic consumerism and conformity. They rejected the museum and gallery as the only place for art. Taking their art out into the landscape was a way to do that. There are murals and sculptures, but often framed or bolted to pedestals and observed on perches in front of buildings. And in the beginning of the late 60s, an increasing number of these artists started questioning this kind of separation and framing of art. They left the city and they started creating art out in the deserts and mountains. They depended on photography to share their art. And it's when people started to call this earth art, environmental art, and land art. Land art became defined as that that is made within or atop or involving a landscape, or art that is made from materials drawn from the landscape. And we have about 6 land artists that we can take a look at. If you can bring that up now, Priscilla. And one of the reasons I like to show the artist, it's one thing to look at a painting or to look at a piece of art, and it's another thing to connect it to the person. Do you have the PDF of the artist, Priscilla? If not, that's okay. Okay, she says 1 minute. Land art did not start as an environmental movement. In fact, massive amounts of earth were moved at the beginning. And here you see the top tier of individuals, Alan Sophist, Michael Heiser, and Robert Smithson. use bulldozers to move art around, and we'll take a look at some of their art. On the bottom tier, Agnes Deems was a Hungarian-born artist, but lives in New York and became a citizen. And she has a couple of pieces of art that really reflect restoration land art. And the next woman, Bronwyn Berman, is from Australia. And we'll take a look at Andy Goldsworthy, who I think if you know land art, you know of Andy Goldsworthy. And there are a couple of videos in here that I want you to see. And primarily because land art is such a hands-on art. It's huge. And oftentimes it takes a drone to take a look at the essence of what the land art is. So we'll move on to the first piece of art, which is spiral jetty. And the sensory qualities associated with land art are shapes and values, textures, but primarily harmony, balance, emphasis, and unity are them. So this is Robert Smithson's 1970 artwork called Spiral Jetty. Have any of you seen this in Salt Lake City? No. It's located in the red waters of Utah's Great Salt Lake. And as you take a look at this, I'll share with you some of what went into making it. It was financed in part by a grant from a New York gallery, and in the 1970s cost $9,000. Smithson was fascinated with entropy, a process of degradation or how natural decay occurs. On the jetty, you're aware of where the volcanoes form the basalt rock, and that's because two assistants and he moved 7,000 tons of earth and basalt, projecting a spiral form into Utah's Great Salt Lake. The earth pathway is 15 feet wide and 1,500 feet long. And tourists come out to here and walk the entire length all the way to the inner spiral. When it was first created, Smithson hired a contractor to create it, and it turned into a question mark. And he had to remove it all and make it again into a spiral, which was his vision. In 1972, it became submerged until the drought caused it to reemerge about 30 years later. And the water levels continue to fluctuate so that the jetty is alternately above water and below water. The changes in the water over the years led to the disappearance of the lake's red algae. And the red algae was a very important element in Robert Smithson's design of the jetty. He associated redness with the fiery sun, and largely, not, right now, largely it's white against pink due to salt incrustation. So if you were to take a walk on it now, the black basalt would really be white from the salt. He created it to be intimately involved with climate change and natural disturbances. And he took a lot of criticism for it in the years subsequent to when he built it, and that's because it juxtaposes the industrial violence in the construction against the peaceful beauty. And the next image shows you what is meant by that. He was accused of a cut and gouge, like Army engineers in the landscape. However, it is kind of an epic and primary source of an image for land art. Spiral jetty, if you do any research at all in land art, will always come up as the premier example of how it was started. It explores the relationship between nature and the human world, and it's less about raising awareness towards ecological problems. So as we take a look at more of the land art, we'll ask ourselves that question. Does it take a look at just the relationship between human and earth, or does it really raise awareness towards ecological problems and begins a restoration? So the next piece of art we're going to take a look at is called Time Landscape. And it's by Alan Sonfist. He lived in New York. He was an American artist and best known as a pioneer and trailblazer in the land art movement, just like Robert Smithson. And Time Landscape brings together art, science in a unique collaboration. It was commissioned by the Public Arts Council and the New York Department of Transportation. It first gained prominence in about 1965. It's found on the corner of West Houston Street and LaGuardia Place in New York City in Greenwich Village. An environmental sculpture that took over 10 years of careful planning with New York City and has often been cited as the first urban forest of its kind. And we can see the next slide too, Priscilla. I have two of these. It is a 25 by 40-foot plot of native trees, shrubs, grasses, and rocks in Greenwich Village that recreates the Manhattan landscape first encountered by Dutch settlers. It's a pre-colonial forest visualizing how the city looked before urbanization. It changes, adapts to the weather, adapts to its own growth and ecological system. But if you were to go to New York, you would find this time landscape kind of tucked in the middle of New York City. Alan Sonfest said, as we have entered the 21st century, we confront a new horizon of the way in which nature will interact with the urban environment. The essence of my art reaches to inspire a dialogue and urban dwellers regarding their impact on the earth. Now, approximately at the same time, Alan Sonfest's vision of land art was time landscape, and the previous one, Robert Smithson, was spiral jetty in the middle of Utah. So we get a sense that land art is very fluid and takes many forms. The next image, which is number 5 and 6, Priscilla, is by Michael Heiser. And he was born in 1944 and created something called levitated mass in 2012, although he started in 1968 to create it. It's in Los Angeles, at the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art. And this is called land art or conceptual art. So keep in mind the spiral jetty, the time landscape, and levitated mass. He was a pioneer in the 60s and widely recognized for environmental structures made with earth-moving equipment. He redefined sculpture in terms of size, mass, gesture, and process. His art explores, and tell me if you see this, positive and negative space, harmonies of presence and absence, matter and space. So if you were to look up Michael Heiser, you would see this theme running throughout his art. It is a massive white boulder, 21.5 feet wide and high, and sits atop 456-foot long sloped high walkway, allowing you to walk underneath this rock through the empty space below. It took 11 nights to move this 340-ton rock from Jurupa Valley, California to the museum. The boulder's 105-mile journey went about 5 miles per hour through Los Angeles. He first sketched the rock in 1968 and imagined that it would be about 1,000 tons and would sit flush on the wall and then appear to rise as you descended it. So the idea brewed in his mind for about 20 years before it came to be. In 2005, a friend of his, a quarry owner, blasted a solid granite boulder out of a mountainside and called Heiser and said, "I've got something I think you're looking for." And it was indeed. He said, "I've been looking for this for 30 years," and bought it. The museum paid $70,000 for this boulder, but the museum paid $10 million for this land art. Heiser rarely explains or comments on this work and has never offered a public explanation of it or the meaning or significance, but he did say he expected it to last 3,500 years. That's a long time. So, does levitated mass at the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art, do you think, explores the relationship between nature and the human world and raise awareness toward ecological problems?
I definitely see nature versus human world. I think you could make an argument for, I don't necessarily see the second aspect, but I think you can make an argument for it for certainly, because he leaves it so open to interpretation. I think.
Anyone else?
I don't see nature so much. You mentioned that the man that sold it to him, it was a construction blast. I understand that, but it wasn't naturally occurring. Now, yes, it was, as it was a stone. I would be nervous. I would never walk under that.
You can show the next slide or the next image, Priscilla. I think when we look through the rest of these, when we look through the rest of the land art, keep in mind the spiral jetty out in Salt Lake, the time landscape in the middle of New York, and this levitated mass at the museum, because we're going to see a theme as we look at this art. This next image of Michael Heiser's levitated mass is simply the boulder that was at the quarry before it was moved to the museum.
Kathy, the walkway that they placed it over, is that a walkway into the museum or is it just a walkway in the middle of nothing?
One of the entrances to the museum.
Okay.
105 miles, 5 miles per hour.
It's hard to imagine the size when you see it in place, but to see somebody next to it, I mean, it is enormous.
Right. I don't know what 340 tons might feel like, but that's how large this rock is. Blasted out of a quarry.
Kathy, when we were at South Dakota a couple years ago, and they're making that Crazy Horse monument.
Mm-hmm.
They do this blasting there too, and people were able to purchase a small rock of that blast. And of course, I wanted one. I think you paid $1 or $10. I forget what it was, and you got a rock. Oh gosh, I don't know, size of a couple of fists. And it's just, I think it's a piece of that history and what they're doing, and I think the sacredness of that area. And it was nice to have a keepsake of that. I understand that. That's just one big stone there.
That is just one big stone, and just kind of think of the freedom artists must have had in using their imagination at a time just to even conceive of doing something like this and being permitted to do it in the 60s and 70s. Our next art work is number 7, Priscilla, and it's by Agnes Deans. She's regarded as the grandmother of the environmental art movement. She's Hungarian born, but now lives in New York, and her artwork was called Wheatfield, a Confrontation. Wheatfield, a Confrontation, and it was in 1982, and it appears in Battery Park. In an act of protest against climate change and economic inequality, Deans planted a massive wheat field in a landfill in downtown Manhattan in 1982, 2 blocks from Wall Street and facing the Statue of Liberty. And it was sponsored by a public art fund. The word confrontation, wheat field, a confrontation, refers to the challenge the wheat field posed to the financial capital of the world and its obsession at the time with accumulating wealth rather than serving human needs. And here's what she did with this. It took 200 truckloads of dirt, 285 furrows were dug by hand and cleared of rocks and garbage. The seeds were sown by hand and the furrows covered with soil. The field was maintained for 4 months, weeded, fertilized, sprayed for fungus, and irrigated. The crop was then harvested in August. The field was planted in May and the crop harvested in August and yielded over about 1,000 pounds of healthy golden wheat. She then shipped that wheat to 28 world cities and set up a show as a part of a show about ending world hunger. She is regarded as a grandmother of an early environmental art movement. Her interest is in the human perception of natural cycles and stewardship. And there's quite a story about her next. Her most famous environmental project is Wheatfield. She stated the health of the planet is in a precarious state and cries out for such restoration more than ever. Earth artist, as she often used natural materials and forms just to kind of dazzle us with their imaginative constructions, but her projects do involve restoration and reclamation, components missing in many examples of earth art, which is why I asked you whether or not you felt it had, the art that we're looking at has an implication for restoration and reclaiming what humanity has done to the soil, to earth. And Agnes Deans, as you'll see, in comparison, is a land artist steeped in the restoration and reclamation part of land art. The land art opened up a whole new way of working with art, paying attention to history, geography, geology, and kind of ownership, whether you owned art or whether you didn't. So here's our question. Based on the spiral jetty, time landscape in New York, the levitated mass in Los Angeles, does Wheatfield foster a relationship between nature and the human world and raise awareness and contribute to the ecological problems?
I think absolutely.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And because why?
Well, to me, she's taking this land that's urban and has been taken over, like you said, by Wall Street, by greater business, and turned it back into farmland, basically, and harvested and created a basic human need, serving a basic human need right there up against the city skyline.
Right. Anyone else? Now, do you see how artists, the land artists, really weren't so concerned about being in a gallery or in a museum, and that they use photographs to share their art?
I think, Kathy, I think just looking at the art, if you were in the museum in LA or wherever, first of all, you would just question, you say, what is this all about? I think it raises a question.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, it's so unusual. And, I would say, well, what does this mean? What's this all about? And so it starts a dialogue, and I think that's the beginning.
It's a beginning, and I think your word starts a dialogue is really important, because we come from art appreciation based on realism, a realistic portrayal of something. So without an open mind in looking at different forms of art, including land art, you really shut it really shuts out not only art of this form, but the symbolism art of African art or Aboriginal art or art of different cultures, Islamic art. Our art in the United States, for the most part, was based on realistic portrayals. And this starts to take us away towards different definitions of what is art. Now, the next, I'm prompting Priscilla here, the next image is also Agnes Dean's. And again, she's Hungarian born, she lives in New York. This art piece of hers is called Tree Mountain. And I have a video for it because I can't do justice in just talking about it. You need to see this and understand what took place. Tree Mountain is a living time capsule in Finland. It's a monumental earthwork reclamation project and the first man-made virgin forest. The site was dedicated by the President of Finland and is legally protected for the next 400 years. So as you look at this, and we'll see a video of it too, it is a man-made mountain, 125 feet high, covered in 11,000 trees and planted by 11,000 people in a configuration according to the golden ratio. And by that I mean it is designed with spirals from such as sunflowers and pineapples. Agnes talks about the mountain, and I have notes on it, but she explains what went into it, why she did this, and the significance of it. So there's a small video, a short video on it that takes us to the very top of the mountain, what it looks like today. It was created in 1996. The concept, her concept, she developed in '82. So it took about 14 years for her to bring the concept to fruition. And let's take a look at this little 4-minute video on Agnes Dean's Tree Mountain land art.
I want to change humanity a little bit. And I think I have. My work was aimed to deal with one little problem at a time and to find benign solutions. We live in nature, we are nature. People know that. They need open space. They plant little gardens in their backyard. They have one little tree producing one little apple. But planting trees is not replacing a forest. So I decided to replace a forest.
I keep looking at those trees behind us, and I would like to see Tree Mountain look like that. It will be quite beautiful when that happens. And I hope to be here and hope to be alive to see it.
Tree Mountain is a future virgin forest, the first made by man. It will take 4 centuries for the ecosystem to establish itself, even if it's man-made. The trees are growing, and some of the trees have been replanted that died in the harsh winters of Finland, and some of them yet need to be. the Ministry of the Environment in Finland invited me to make my concept a reality. I accepted, and then it took 4 more years to build a mountain to my specifications. It's a mathematical expansion system that is related to the golden ratio in a simplified form. I planted the first trees, and then people were invited from around the world to plant, and each one received a certificate that they are the owners of the tree and can leave it to their descendants for the next 400 years. Good luck, little tree. Good luck. Of course, anything that you put into the world, you become responsible for. And I try very hard to maintain the mountain. There is no funding. Everybody's talking about it, but nobody is helping it, which is a very human characteristic. But there is a beautiful forest, and people are beginning to understand the importance of this work, its meaning, its intent. My hope is they keep it going through the centuries. It would be incredible to walk in a virgin forest that's made by humanity. It's an achievement, a human achievement.
Thank you. So, Tree Mountain. It is an inheritable document that the people who planted the trees get. It connects the 11,000 planters and their descendants, reaching into millions over the years, connected by their trees. People from around the world are proud custodians that bear their names. They can be buried under the trees, but the tree mountain itself can never be owned or sold, nor can the trees be moved from the forest. It's a monumental development in land art. So we take a look at Spiral Jetty out in Salt Lake City, Time Landscape in New York City, a prehistoric forest destined to be, Levitated Mass in Los Angeles, the Wheat Fields by Agnes, and now Tree Mountain. So these are very, very large undertakings that cost significant amount of money that may or may not be able to be achieved or completed today based on climate change, zoning restrictions, land use, and just the concept of how we're using our earth today. And we're going to take a turn from these very large land art presentations to a different form of land art now, which is aesthetic, but no less significant. And I'm very interested to hear what your observations are as we move now towards another type of land art. And the next one is a series of images, and I think it's number 9 now, Priscilla. And this is by an artist, a land artist named Spencer Biles. He spent over 12 months exploring French forests, creating on-site sculptures. They're all temporary sculptures, and they're made with natural materials found on site. They're scattered in the woods. You often discover them as you walk. They're sometimes difficult to see since they kind of gracefully fit right in with nature because they're made from items from nature. The sculptures curve with nature. So does this land art connect us with a relationship with the earth, and does it have a significant effect on the ecological problems we are encountering. In other words, wheat fields and Tree Mountain and Time landscape in New York were different than something like this, right?
Yes.
How? And I ask that because I'm interested in your observations as we all learn about land art.
I didn't, this one to me seems maybe he's trying to almost frame a view, tell you how to look at what you're looking at maybe.
Anyone else?
Well, I like that it's temporary in a way. It brings art into the natural world, man art into the natural art of the world, but it's temporary and it'll disappear and become part of nature.
Right.
And I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, what I see is as you walk through this forest or whatever it might be, you come upon this and the surprise of seeing it there. And yet it gives me the impression of a clock. So maybe it shows time going by.
Oh.
I think to each person, it probably has a different feeling or meaning, see different things in it. And the stones in the center, certainly there are more than 12, and yet it gives me that feeling of a clock, a very large clock in the middle of a forest.
Right. That's a good observation.
I think to me it's almost childlike and kind of mystical, something you might see in a, I don't know, not a Harry Potter, something magical about it. But it, I like the idea too that it's temporary and it's human art that was put in nature, but yet it's going to go away naturally and not be obtrusive or something like some of the other projects. You know, the forest, I get kind of concerned about that large forest that was created, although it must have been a lot of time put into that as far as how many trees can grow together and not become an issue later on and become almost a hazard with fires. But who does manage that? Where this one won't be managed, it'll just go away.
Right. Very good. Very good. And you can set up the next one, Priscilla. These artists who have this aesthetic sense about nature work in circles, spirals. They have snake-like lines. So as you research and look at aesthetic land art, and that's my term, I see certain lines and harmony based on organic shapes in nature. This next piece is by Richard Schilling, a land artist who only uses natural items from surrounding areas. His themes are balancing and geometric shapes, using seasonal colors and different kinds of hues. The art can last a few minutes to several months, and he often visits them to see what happened to them over time. And of course, he takes photographs to share his art, as almost all the land artists do. But it's a very Tao kind of feeling, isn't it? Do you like it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
The next art, and there are two, Richard Schilling has another piece here that we're taking a look at, and that was stones, but he also works with leaves. And I think the leaves here are very intricately carved out. Several land artists have this almost dichotomy within them. They work on this large, hard scale, but they can take a delicate leaf and carve it into a almost stained glass look.
That's really cool.
isn't it?
Yeah.
But isn't it interesting also the left image where the artist just simply imagined and then created it? He
Yes.
saw this in his mind's eye. This is Richard Schilling. And he has if you do any research, he has magnificent examples of taking a leaf and doing exactly this, literally creating a stained glass effect on it. So again, we take a look at the early artists we looked at in the 60s and 70s who rearranged the land, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
And these artists, these land artists, a little bit later, who would you say work with the land or are transient with the land? Well, how would you describe these two sets of land arts that we're looking at?
The more recent ones look like they are using what's there and representing it differently. But it's temporary. It's not going to last forever. And it didn't require a bulldozer. It was just, you know, kind of taking and playing with the things that are there.
Right. Anyone else?
Yes, the one that's looks like stained glass, the minute I saw it, even though it is made up of leaves, and I don't know if there's metal rods or what exactly they are. However, it reminds me of when I was a kid and the, oh, what was that called? The, that you looked in the little hole and you moved it around.
A
Oh, I can't think of it.
kaleidoscope.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Exactly. And that's what it reminds me of. Even though it's all natural, or at least the leaves are, it has that feeling of, I guess, a reminder of a more innocent time, at
Oh,
least
that's
for
great.
me.
It does too, Helene, like very arts and crafts, like something you would have not, you couldn't have made this probably, but at summer camp, you would have made in like arts and crafts class or
Yeah.
something similar.
Right. Also, you can imagine the sun shining through that, can't you?
Yes.
Yes,
The next
it's
two,
lovely.
it is, isn't it? The next two pieces of art are from the Lost Gardens of Helican in Cornwall, England. It is one of the most mysterious country estates in Cornwall, England. At the end of the 19th century, the 1800s, a mile and a half of this garden gave way to blackberry scrub and vine ivy growing, and it really literally went to sleep as a garden. Then after World War I, they began a restoration of this garden. It's a popular garden visited today. The Cornish word for Heligan means willow garden, and this mound we're looking at, made of rocks and plants, is called Mudmaid. So if you were to travel throughout this garden, I get the sense that land art started well before the 60s and 70s. And we know that. We know that from looking at the 7 ancient wonders of the world, or just even the wonders of the world, that people worked with the earth and created things in the earth. But isn't this charming?
Kathy, I think also these things also remind me of Stonehenge and
Yes.
Easter Island. I mean, those were ancient kind of art, land art pieces that were far, before the 1960s. But these monolithic, huge things remind me of those. And, we're still curious as to how they came about and what they mean.
Well, how they came about, constructed them so that they did not have an aerial view at the time, but the Incas created shapes on land that today we look at from the air and are amazed at the construction of them.
Right, yeah.
the next one is also in the Lost Garden of Heligan, and I choose it because land art is an interesting term. It involves, there are no rules of what is art and what isn't, and this is also in the garden. It's called The Giant's Head. Isn't it charming?
Fun, yeah, that's fun.
Stones, rock, and plant life. Do you think this is land art?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
You do.
Manipulation of the surroundings to make it whimsical and fun. And imagine walking through and coming across him. He's so cute.
What did you say it's called?
It's called Giant's Head, and the other one was called Mud Maid. And Priscilla sent out a presentation of the images. If you are ever in Cornwall, England, go to this garden. It's enchanting. It's old. There isn't anything like a mature garden that that gives a mystical kind of magical feeling. So this is the Lost Gardens of Heligan, and we're going to move on to another piece of art called Wind Spiral 2. It's just very diverse, the land art that we're looking at, from Spiral Jetty to the Time landscapes in New York, the wheat field, where we begin to take a look at the manipulation of leaves and twigs and pine cones to create temporary art. This art is made by Bronwyn Berman. She's an Australian. This is stainless steel, aluminum with timber support. And if you were to look her up, you would find out that she has this image in her mind of, again, an organic shape taking off with wings, supported, and you get the feeling that it is just feather light. But she works in stainless steel, aluminum, and wood. She says her sculptural installations are a response to our natural system, speaking to our inner knowing of the earth today. She explores simplest and most basic signifiers of these systems through an inquiry into classic geometric shapes. Do you like this one?
Yes, it's really neat looking.
It would be good to have a person there to see scale, wouldn't it?
Yes. Do you know how big it is?
I don't. There's very little information on it, but it's called Wind Spiral 2.
Is there a number 1?
There is a number 1, and it isn't as dramatic as this one, as one would expect. She became much more adventuresome as she pursued her art, but it's a beautiful example of land art, if you came upon it, right?
Where is it located?
Australia, in Sydney, Australia.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So
It's organic, you know. It looks like it looks like hair coming out of it, you know, and it looks like it's a kind of an animal in a way.
when we look at art movements, there is a style, and there are similarities of technique and materials used in land art, while there is nature being used. Style is wide open. What you do with it is a broad sweep, a broad brushstroke, as you can see. And I would ask you, what is the difference between sculpture and land art, or is it all the same?
Well, that's definitely sculptural. I mean, you could put that same thing in a museum, but having it in a natural environment like that, it just opens it up because you get to have a bigger canvas, so to speak.
Right.
You
Now,
also get the three-dimensional quality. So it's something you can walk around and view at the different angles.
again, the initial response to land artists was against commercialization. You don't have to own my art. So we're going to move on to Andy Goldsworthy. Have you learned about Andy Goldsworthy or read about him, looked at his art at all, any of you? Do you know that name? Children in elementary school are taught about Andrew Goldsworthy and taken on kind of excursions into the forest to recreate some of what he has taught us about nature. He's a British sculptor, photographer, and environmentalist, and produces site-specific sculptures. He works in brightly colored flowers, leaves, icicles, mud, pine cones, snow, and we're going to have a short video of his at the end of these three slides, or three images. He is considered the founder of rock balancing. He grew up in England, went to art school and couldn't stand it because he was confined in a cubicle. He worked the summers and in his youth as a farmhand, where he just developed this affinity for nature. Photography plays a crucial role in his art due to the transient nature of it, and you're going to see a bit how transient it really is. He says each work grows, stays, decays, and becomes an integral part of the circle of life. There are many documentaries on Andy Goldsworthy. He will take journalists and writers out on a journey on the Scottish countryside, not knowing what he's going to make, what he's going to create, and is inspired by nature as he walks and then creates a work of art. He lives in an area where homeowners and farm owners around him have given him free reign to create art on their property. So it's common to see his artwork along hillsides, on the top of hills, in valleys, stone walls, different kinds of natural materials coming together. Much of his work incorporates the idea of balancing opposites until the tension of their contradiction results in a collapse. Remember that as we look at the video. Balancing opposites until the tension causes a collapse. And the next image.
It's coming up.
His images also fall in line with so many of the land artists who work in spirals, circles, organic shapes. One good wind, right?
Yes. It must be so temporary. Like, that had to take a lot of patience.
It takes a lot of patience, but it also takes, I think, a sense of being a perfectionist.
Yes.
Doesn't it? And an acceptance that what you're doing is transient.
Mm-hmm.
And
that would be very hard for a perfectionist to know that a strong wind is going to eliminate all that work.
Yes. And the next image.
Bear with me one moment.
Mm-hmm. There's a difference between these art forms, though, which kind of captured my attention, this magnified, massive art form, and then these intricate, transient expressions of nature and art.
Wow.
That is very different from the other ones that he did. That looks permanent
Right.
and like it doesn't belong there.
It doesn't belong, is that right? A snake-like form through earth. And if you look at Andy Goldsworthy, he works with the stem of a leaf, and then he'll work with mechanical tools to carve out stone and to create amazing stone architecture. We're winding up with a video for Andy Goldsworthy, and in this video, you get an insight into the land artists who create these transient art forms from nature versus the artists who work on a monumental scale. You can set that one up, Priscilla. And this is a video of Andy Goldsworthy, because this artwork, land art, is such a physical art. There was no way to just kind of give you a glimpse of land art without showing you a couple of videos of what it entails to do this.
Sorry, bear with me one moment. Okay, there we go.
I've shook hands with the place and begun. I wish I'd reached this point about an hour ago, before the sun had risen. What is extraordinary that I didn't expect, but could only have dreamt of happening, is that the sun coming from there shines completely on both sides of the rock. So all the icicle is illuminated against that cliff, and I never had any idea that would happen. So the potential here is fantastic. When I make a work, I often take it to the very edge of its collapse. And that's a very beautiful balance. Oops.
we go. How'd you feel when it fell down? Well done. So the environmental artists have been praised for not only great works, but for creating awareness about environmental problems on the planet. And it seems as though they do it in two ways. On a monumental scale to draw our attention to it, and then on this beautiful, transient, artistic scale, taking nature and creating these kinds of images that we only see in photographs. But the whole underlying message is our connection to nature. And it's a very broad term, land art, earth art, conceptual art, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think it probably will continue. The restraints really are money, a commission for it, and a desire to rehabilitate our earth somehow with an artist's vision and pay for it. Did you have any other thoughts at all about land art?
Well, the fact that you don't have to go to a metropolitan museum and look at one thing after another, you're walking and it surprises you. It's just there. It's part of, and anybody can go see it at any time. In the dawn, at sunset, it doesn't matter. It really allows it to be anyone for everyone.
Now, what happened in the Coachella, excuse me, go ahead.
Go ahead.
What happened in Coachella Valley in land art?
Oh, the Desert X exhibits.
Would you consider that land art?
Yes. I think some land art and some installations of art out in nature. That's two different things, or like some weren't made of land or natural materials, I think. But
I would define land art made from the land surrounding it, and the other would be an installation like the one that Spiral by the Sea is more like an installation out in nature rather than made from nature.
That's a very good observation from these images.
Also, the one that I thought we would see, and I cannot think of his name right now, I do believe he passed away just a couple of years ago. And it was a few years that he did his installations, but also they were the sheets that he would hang in various countries. And I can't think of his name, I'm sorry. But it was recently, like a few years ago. And I think the last one was somewhat local, meaning it's someplace in the United States, but right now I can't remember.
You're right, Helene. I missed that one. It was in California, and he did get permission to go through several counties, and he hung a line through counties of these sheets.
Right.
You're right. It was
And it was recent, so it was something we could see, whereas most of these others were temporary, as many people have suggested, or are far away. And
right.
So, so this was, I found it very interesting.
Right. Once the pandemic is over, it might be worth a trip to Los Angeles to see the rock suspended over the museum. Don't you think that would be an interesting one?
Yeah.
I will appreciate it more now.
Yes.
I remember when they were bringing it down Wilshire Boulevard. I'm sorry, I think I'm interrupting somebody. I'm having problems with my phone. So, I remember when they were bringing it down Wilshire Boulevard. I may have been living, calling my son, telling him to take my eldest grandson at that point down there and see, because they would stop the rock or the movement of the rock at certain times of the day, so it wouldn't interfere with traffic.
Right.
And so, again, it's something that I thought they did finally go and walk under it, by the way, after it was installed. But I find it very interesting that this is something that is still going on. People are still doing this. And it's very interesting. It brings some emotion to us, I feel, and certainly it touches our intellect, you know, what we should be doing that we're not doing to preserve things on this earth.
And perhaps climate change will be a catalyst for more of this kind of regard for reclaiming and restoration work. We'll see. But that's what I had for today.